First of all, I think it's a wonderful idea that we have this series. So thank you, Kristen and Qin and Hansen, for organizing this. It's really a great pleasure to introduce Professor Huan Jin, who is assistant professor in the Division of Humanities at the University of Science and Technology in Hong Kong. Her focus is late imperial Chinese literature, Mingqi literature, but she also works broadly on adjacent areas of cultural history. And the book is very much a product of her endeavors in this area. So the origins of this book was a dissertation that Professor Jin completed in ELIC at Harvard in 2017. But in fact, I said that its origins in there, but it's completely different. So it's like a new book. Things in the dissertation were left out, and then very many new chapters were added to the book. And I just want to add that she's here to work on two projects making use of the resources at the Harvard Yanjing Library, one of which is called The Technologies and Poetics of Late Imperial Chinese Epistolary Culture, so about letters, how letters function in literature and how manuscripts and manuals about letter writing were produced in the Ming and Qing dynasties. Another project has to do with early 19th century missionary publications in China, and that project I think has more to do with this book on the Taiping Rebellion. I just want to say that this is a truly pioneering book because it's really the first book, I think not only the first book in English but also in Chinese, but unless I miss out, the first book that tries to theorize about the literary and cultural implications of the Taiping Rebellion and thinking about that traumatic historical event in terms of its literary and cultural ramifications. So without further ado, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Lee, for these kind words. It is my great pleasure to be back and to share this work with you. As Professor Lee was saying, its inception was from my PhD stage, and then I developed it and revised it into this book. And it is also great to see so many familiar faces, and many of you have been with me on this journey of publishing this book. So I would like to thank Harvard Asia Center for bringing me back to town and for having this presentation today, and also for Tenzin for setting this up, the technical aspect, and for Kristen and Qin for being so helpful and so patient with me during the publication process. And lastly, thanks to Professor Wai-yee, who took up time from her very busy schedule to moderate the talk today, and also for all her support over these years. So now, without further ado, let's delve into the book talk. I would like to pause and invite you all to think with me. What is the Taiping War? That is the nature of this event, and so this event is called by different names: rebellion, revolution, the Taiping Civil War, and each has its political implications. And to summarize the nature of this event in very simplistic terms, it is an uprising led by Hong Xiuquan, who was inspired by Christianity and considered himself to be the son of God. And he led this uprising against the Manchu government. And so this war was influenced by the Opium War, the first Opium War, and it also, when the Taiping War was happening in the south for a period of time, the second Opium War was taking place in the north. So when we think of this 1.5 decades, we have to know, the political and military landscape of the entire China at the time. And so the consequence of this war is devastating. It's allegedly one of the most devastating civil wars in human history, causing a death total of 20 million to 30 million. And also it wiped out the Jiangnan region in terms of its culture, wealth, and also cost of lives. It also introduced the epistemic shift and had the clashing of ideologies and reverberations in literary, political, and cultural realms. Now, these are some questions I pursue in this book. First of all, what is the meaning of history and for whom and at what time? So I would like to talk a little bit about what I mean by heaven in this book title. And using this term, I'm referring to a wide range of meanings from the ideal of heaven in the Taiping discourse to Manchu, the Qing political authority, and from imaginations about immortality and religious transcendence to political and moral certainty. So essentially, by heaven, I mean anything that may symbolize or represents a sense of stability or certainty. Now, the central argument of this book is that the writers of this time, when they were trying to respond to what they have experienced, return to literary and cultural models in the past to make sense of their present. However, the recreations of those past models that may symbolize certain stability only suggest the crumbling of those ideals, and they also express a lot of disillusionment. And in this sense, we saw the unraveling of imperial literary and cultural paradigms, which gave rise to a variety of possibilities in terms of literary and cultural modernity. And so in terms of method, these are some key terms I'm having in mind. So first of all, how time was humanly experienced during political turbulences, and how people made sense of their experiences of time through narratives in various forms. And those narratives were mediated by books and manuscripts and various forms of printed media. So this is, the through line of this book. And here is the book, structure. It's divided into two parts, and the first part is titled "Competing Visions of Heaven and Hell," where I talk about the clashing ideologies in contrast with personal writings. And part two, Making Sense of the Past and the Future, is about post-Taiping literary and artistic expressions about war experiences. Now, chapter 1, Heavenly Visions, is about the Taiping textual universe, and chapter 2, Revelations from Hell, talks about the reinterpretation of the Qing propaganda titled Secret Edicts in response to the Taiping ideology. And the third chapter, Order in Disorder, is what we are going to focus on today. It is about personal accounts and memoirs that were produced in the middle of the war. Now, chapter 4, Traces of History, talks about a full-length literary novel written partly in the war and partly after it. Chapter 4, Violence in Drama, talks about dramatic representation of the war. And chapter 6, Fantasies, is about tales of fantastic imaginations that were written decades after the war. So, now, as you can see, this book generally follows a chronological order when I structure the chapters, and at the same time threaded through this book is achronological concerns, because as I trace tropes and allusions, I go back to the Ming-Qing dynastic transition and to as early as the late Tang period. Now, let's talk about a specific chapter to illustrate my method and my materials in this book, Order in Disorder, Personal Accounts of War. So in terms of individuals' historical accounts about the war, there are generally two categories. One kind include accounts in resemblance of official history, and the other kind includes diaries and memoirs focusing on personal experiences, and it is the second category that I delve into in today's discussion. But I have to say there's much overlap between these two categories in the writings I've seen. Now, let's think together, what do we mean by the diary as a genre, right? I believe all of you have written some sort of diary at some point of your life, right? If we think of it as a genre, like what characteristics does it carry? Now, first of all, it always has an I as the narrator, right, from the first person perspective. And second, it always tries to abide by this kind of diurnal, rhythm, like everyday rhythm. We may not keep entry every day, but we try to, right? We can come back to this diary a couple days ago, a couple days after finishing last entry. And diary is also a very ambiguous kind of genre because it borders on objectivity and subjectivity, and also the personal and the public, and the performativity and sincerity. And so another question is, when we use diary, it is a concept in English, right? So what is the corresponding word in Chinese when we talk about diary? And so far, what I saw is primarily called ji, records, essentially, or accounts, or in another word, logs of events. And so I find this diary on Escape from the Rebels very much representative of the personal accounts I've consulted that were written in the middle of this war. And it is a text consisted of 3 volumes, and I will talk more about its materiality very soon. But before then, let's historicize or contextualize this text a little bit more. Now, the diarist comes from Jiaxing in Zhejiang province, and this is where it is. So Jiaxing borders Huzhou and Hangzhou, 2 major towns in Zhejiang, and these neighboring towns are going to come up a lot in our discussion. Now, this is the development of this event in Zhejiang province around the time when this diary was written. So on March 4th, 1860, the Taiping rebels invaded Huzhou, and on June 15th, 1860, the Taipings occupied Jiaxing, which is the hometown of this writer. And on December 10th, 1861, the Taipings took over Hangzhou, the capital city of Zhejiang province. On March 17, 1864, the Taipings were defeated at Jiaxing, and in August 1864, the capital of the Taiping kingdom was taken, and therefore this kingdom met its downfall. Now, so this 1860 to 1864 is roughly the period when this diary covers. Now, the Shenzi, or the Shen family. Now, Shenzi was 28 years old when he first started writing this diary. And his father, Shen Tao, died shortly before the invasion of their hometown by the Taipings. So when the war broke out in Jiaxing, Shenzi was taking care of the funeral of his father. And he was the head of this house that consisted of 7 people, including his elder mother and his widowed sister, Shen Fen, who came back to live with her maternal family a few years ago, and Shen Zi's wife, who was pregnant, and a younger sister who was not married, and also a younger brother who was practicing business in Suzhou, during this time, but Shenzi had lost contact with him for several months after the Taiping rebels took over Suzhou. And Shenzi, at the beginning of the diary, talks about looking for his younger brother a lot, but gradually he just dropped this topic entirely. And he also had 2 married younger sisters living elsewhere. But at the end of this war, only Shenzi and his elder mother survived. So he lost most of his families within 1 month period after the Taiping rebels took over Jiaxing. Now, after Shenzi was a private tutor before the war, and after the war, he studied at the Imperial Academy and acquired the post of secretary in the Grand Secretariat briefly. And with the pretext of filial responsibilities, he resigned very soon and returned hometown to become a philanthropist in Puyuan. And he started the Xiangyun Academy and created this philanthropy hall to distribute clothes and medicine among the poor and organize proper bureaus for the deceased. So that is his post-war effort, which he does not talk about in this diary. Now, throughout of the entire diary, there are only 2 instances where Shenzi cried out to heaven. And these 2 instances happened when he tried to relocate his family to seek refuge at a safer place after the immediate invasion of the Taipings. So the first entry is dated to September 12th, 1860, right? And the Taipings really took over and come to the backyard of their house on September 11th, 1860. So this entry writes, "It rained heavily again. There was no shelter in our immediate surroundings, so we had nowhere to hide. The field was rather slippery. Mother fell and got up again. I cried out for heaven and wept." And the second one happened about 10 days later, when he again tried to relocate this family to escape from the rebels. As soon as we untied the cable of the boat, it rained again. When we arrived at the bridge, it rained heavily as dusk was falling. Extremely discouraged, I could only cry out to heaven. So we see here that the weather is not really working towards his advantage, and he really felt desperate at those moments. And those moments of desperation is not only kept in these words, but also in terms of how these words were mediated and materialized in the physical form of this book, which is what I'm going to introduce now. So now I'm going to talk about the materiality of this manuscript. And this manuscript, it's consisted of pages of various sizes and pasted onto a used account book. And the page can be as large as the size of an A4 paper or as small as 2 index fingers. Now, as you can see, it's heavily edited and revised. And the paper quality varied too. So most of the diary is written on the Xuan paper, commonly used by educated men, but sometimes you also see this kind of bamboo paper with darker color. And this is an example of how he sometimes first jot down a few entries and then expanded later on. And this is an example of how he recycled the used paper on which poetry or prose written in preparation for civil service examination were written, and repurposed it to write his diary on the margins of it. And this is a note inserted by the modern historian who compiled or who could prepare this manuscript for modern typeset edition that was published in 1961. So this manuscript was not put into print until 1961. And here are some conjectures and observations. First of all, who compiled this diary? My hypothesis is that Shenzi himself was involved in pasting the pieces of paper onto the back of the accounts books. And also he named these 3 volumes differently, as you might have seen. So one is called Miscellaneous Notes from the Northern Mountain Studio, and the other one is Escape from the Rebels, right? And because in the Northern Mountain Studio volume, there's more intimate descriptions of how the family was on the run, and it's more intense emotionally and also more private. But for the Escape from the Rebels, he focuses more on the public events. The second question is, who was the intended audience of the diary? We do not know because it was not published. However, from the edits, I do believe that he anticipates some kind of audience engagement, and we do not know what kind of form it might take. And was the diary meant to be published? We do not know, but we do know that he later on published a text that's in the form of the more official history kind of genre that uses sources from this manuscript. And last question is, when was the revisions made? We do not know, and I suggest that there are multiple layers of revisions, so he came back to edit it numerous times. And so it's really a very rich material to delve into, considering its multi-layered nature. And here I would like to introduce an example to compare with what we saw on the manuscript of Shenzi. So this is a page layout from an unknown boy's diary, written in 4 languages on the margins of a French novel from Auschwitz. And from both cases, we can see the scarcity of sources and also the sense of urgency that's communicated by the way it's written, in a material form during political chaos. Now, so after laying out the materiality of this text, I'll later on introduce more examples, specifically how we may do archaeological work to, tease out the interstices of these lines. But first off, conceptually, how we take this diary as a, narrative. So the narrativity of diary. What is a narrative? So according to various theorists, narrative is an essential cognitive tool for human beings, especially at times like this. And definition of narratives, first of all, sum of events, and some also say events in order of exposition. And there's also proposition of narrative being the discourse that produces convergence of meaning as opposed to description, exposition, and argument. Now, the narrativity of Diary on Escape, as I summarize, is the following. The conformation to temporal sequentiality and also first-person narrator, and the narrative discourse, so-called being Shenzi's personal experiences during the war. Now, I would like to show you an example of the first page of this diary. So my goal was to look for the first entry on the first page, and it's at the upper corner of this page. And I'm going to zoom in so that you can see this is the line. And it says, on the 12th of the second month in the 10th year of the Xianfeng reign, on 4th March 1860, I was at the Gao household in Xincheng. Suddenly, I heard that the long-haired bandits had entered from Santang in County Changxing of Huzhou. So Xincheng is where Shenzi was tutoring at the time. And this diary starts very abruptly, just like other kind of personal event, like accounts I saw from this period. And why does it start from this day, but not from some other, politically more significant days, such as the establishment of the Taiping Kingdom, or the establishment of the capital of the Taiping Kingdom, which respectively happened in 1851 and 1853, right? It starts in 1860 because this event or this war is happening so close. It's no longer possible to keep it at bay because Huzhou is right next to Xincheng where he's living. So he begins to really keenly observe the development of the war, first from the neighboring towns. And now, when we go deeper into the later part of this diary, I would like to first talk about this concept of value of narrativity in the representation of reality brought up by Hayden White. And as he suggests, there are three modes of historical writing, including the analyst, who essentially just list events unselectively, and the events themselves do not form a causal relationship, and there's not careful consideration of the overarching framework. And there's also the chronicler who seek to find or establish kind of cause and effect relationship between these events, and also try to make some purpose in this structure of his writing. And the last one is the ideal of history proper, in which all events recorded speak to a sense of totality, so-called by 𝘾𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤 of history. Now, in the following examination, I'm going to see how Shenzi, through his edits, transforms from an analyst to a chronicler, from his records about the public realm and about the political life, private life. Now, in this example, I show this comparison between his pre and after edits. So the first draft goes, on this day, a few rebels came to the outside of the barriers. It happened on August 26, 1860, and a date to remember is on 11th September 1860. His house backyard was encroached upon by the rebels, so it's very close. And in the revision, he says, on this day, a few rebels began to scurry up to the barriers. So he began to assert this sense of beginning, and when there's a beginning, there's an implication of ending, which is the previous chapter has ended, and now there is a sense of historical consciousness about what's going to unfold later on. And this is a retrospective revision, right? So he's having a historical hindsight from this time. And scurry is also, inserted as a kind of derogatory term to criticize the rebels. And this is another example where he tries to assert a sense of beginning. In the first draft, he writes, on the 25th and 26th, some refugee boats from Huzhou began to return to Xincheng. After a while, as food ran out on the boats, women all went to beg on the bank. Upon examination, they were all from proper families. Now here is how he changes it, and I indicate the changes in yellow. At the beginning, 500 to 600 refugee boats from Huzhou docked at Xincheng. So again, beginning, and he's also assessing the number of the boats, which did not exist before. So he's taking the perspective as a historian now. And then after a while, as food ran out on the boats, women all went to beg on the bank. Upon examination, they were all from proper families. And now he also adds, my town is to the north of this. So he's assessing the distance between this refugee boat and his own town, which is also located on a waterfront. And so this is might very well happen to him very soon, or he and his family probably was on one of these refugee boats, and they are from proper family. Now, another example shows how he tried to establish a kind of cause and effect relationship by making revisions. So here, as stated from 18th May 1860, he talks about the first public execution of the Taiping rebels captured by the villagers, the townsmen. And then so he writes, the rebels were all killed on the crimson steps of the Heavenly King's palace in the fragrant ocean temple. This place from then on became the execution ground. And in the revision, he adds one word. The rebels were all killed on the crimson steps of the Heavenly King's palace in the fragrant ocean temple, and therefore, so. This place in Chinese is rendered as from then on became the execution ground. Now I'll invite you to look at the text, its material form with me. So this line is placed as indicated by blue on this page, and I'm going to zoom in. So 岁病鲨鱼, like they were killed in front of this temple on the crimson steps, right? These are the exact wording. And then here we see this blue marked are inserted into this line. And there's more information added later, but they belong to others, like a different sentence. Now, so this is a very striking scene because it maps violence onto the religious site, that is the temple, right? And this violence is executed by the villagers themselves. So it's a public display of declaration of the war from the villagers against the Taiping rebels. And where is this temple? On the map from the late 19th century, we see it's right in the middle of this town. The left side is Tongxiang, and the right side of this image is Jiaxing, where the writer's hometown is, and it's divided by the Grand Canal. So in this example, I show you how he, maybe out of self-censorship, sometimes also make revisions. So in this entry, he relates to the event of Taiping rebels capturing Hangzhou. And now we know that the Taipings conquered Hangzhou, the capital city of Zhejiang, on 10th December 1861, right? But during the chaos of the war, the information was so hard to verify that he took 2 months to really get to know what happened in Hangzhou. And during this time, he was comparing facts and also rumors and trying to figure out what's happening. And so this excerpt is from the entry of 5th January 1862, about almost a month after the Hangzhou was took over. So here he talks about how on the street he came across a group of low-rank Taiping soldiers, and all of them wear this sort of medal on their wrist. And on the medal there is inscription. So he asked one of them, what's written there? And in the first draft, he says, he was told, the Manchu fled and the blessed triumphed. So the blessed in the Taiping dictionary means God. So it's a celebration of the victory that's blessed by God, which makes a lot of sense given their ideology, right? But in the revision, he writes urgent affairs, which seems to be really ambiguous, right? And is it possible that he's trying to stay away from any trouble after, the Qing's victory? Might be. And here is how he specifically make these changes. And you can see cross out the 4 characters and then add these 2. Now, we have talked about how he changed accounts about events in the public realm, and now I'm going to talk about how he also expressed his very deep and private emotions in revisions about his domestic kind of realm. So first of all, clarification of the concept of trauma as Encyclopedia of Psychology defines it's a psychologically distressing event that was outside the range of usual human experience, often involves a sense of intense fear, terror, and helplessness. Now, Shenzi's revisions oftentimes vents about his frustrations and also his sorrows during the occurrence of this war. So this excerpt is from the 14th of September 1860, 3 days after the Taipings pushed the family out from their household, and he was on the way of looking for his brother during the day. And so what happened was that he sought help from a cousin to go together to look for the brother. But the cousin refused this request because the cousin wanted to see the floating bodies on the river. And the first draft goes, I was on the journey by myself. There has been a history of the family having conflicting opinions, and there is a reason for that to lead to disasters. So this image I'm showing you now is a line, right, of characters, and then it extends to, insert an entire line that goes, Alice, since the loss of my younger brother, I was on the journey all by myself. I had absolutely no support from siblings. Things have always been this way. there has been a history of the family having conflicting opinions, and there is a reason for that to lead to disasters. So now he's lamenting that he did not have the support of the family, which did not come up in the first draft. And what I found most, impressive is his mourning over the death of 𝘾𝙤𝙤𝙤, his elder sister, who was widowed before the war and came to live with the family for several years, actually, up to the outbreak of this war in the town. Now, he made many revisions, and this is a page where he mostly talked about his conversation with female family members immediately after the Taipings took over the town, and especially his conversation with the elder sister. Now, this is the place where I'm going to, show you the first example. So here, he's trying to persuade the sister to join her and, run together with the younger sister and her wife, but her elder sister refused to do so because she said, when there are alarms in the town, you all flee and hide. I cannot walk at all, and we have to think of the bound feet of Chinese women in the imperial period. No one in the village will stay with me except for mother. What shall we do if the rebels come to hurt me and hurt mother as well? Right? So the elder sister refused to go together with them. And in the revision, it says, what is the difference between living in the countryside and in the town? Upon hearing the alarms, we do not know if they are true or not. So here is a very viable, whether the rumors are verifiable is very much up in the air. And while my sister-in-law and younger sister both escaped and hid in the grass field, I am unable to walk. So here she talked about the survival instincts, right? And also the feeling of being abandoned. And everyone in the entire village fled, leaving behind only mother who stayed to be with me. Here she talks about her responsibility and care towards the mother. What shall we do if the rebels come to hurt me and hurt mother as well? So in the revision, 𝘾𝙤𝙤 is putting these words into the mouth of his elder sister, right? We have to always think of this kind of mediation that's happening in her voice now. And many issues, as I just mentioned, is brought up in this revision. And this is another place where he changed 2 words of her speech, and that made a difference. So in the first draft, she says, essentially, don't care about me, just leave, right? And she says, please don't buy the medicine. I am determined to die. In the revision, she says, please don't buy the medicine. I desire to die from morning to night. And in the manuscript, you see the change of these 2 characters. And what difference does it make? First, literally, 朝夕 is more lyrical than the original wording. And secondly, it changed the situation from an impulse of the sister to a premeditated, yearned kind of death of hers. And this is another case where she and 𝘾𝙤𝙤 are talking about how to take care of her bureau after her death. On the night of the 25th, my older sister asked me, what will you do if I die? I answered, you still have 100,000 in your savings. I will use 50,000 for the funeral expenses, and the rest will be for the bureau cost. Sister said, in that case, I shall die in peace. The only thing I cannot let go of is mother. So the entire content is inserted afterwards. Now, what does it mean by talking about taking care of the bureau cost while this person is still alive, right? It's tremendously sad, and at the same time, there's a kind of acceptance, unspoken, between these two, that it is decided that she is going to die out of her own choice. And so this is really, I think, troubling for 𝘾𝙤𝙤 because he survived the war, and the sister didn't, right? And I think he felt kind of survivor's guilt towards the end of it. That's why he kept go back and edit it. And he did not only revise the manuscript, but also put words into print and anthologize her poems in a local gazetteer that he participated in compiling after the war. So in this local gazetteer, her death takes a very different light compared with what we see in the manuscript. So here we see, probably also edited by male editors, but also, but still like her voice in a relatively more authentic form. This is a preface of hers, put in front of the poems that she's written. So she presents herself as such. My father made this painting in the late spring of the Qichao year. At the time, my husband was sick. He died that winter. The next summer, father also passed away. After these two extraordinary tragedies, my illness accelerated and I almost died. After another round of winter and summer, I gradually recovered from my illness. Spreading the scroll, I am grief-stricken. With respect, I composed 5 poems to record the endless sorrow that will only end with my death. So here she presents herself as a loyal widowed wife, right? A filial daughter who is really, saddened by her losses, but can still find a sort of, rescue or refuge or tranquility in the artistic pursuits. So she's presented in this local gazetteer as a talented woman in this section. And Shen-zi also wrote a biography of Shen-fen. And in this biography, he relates to what happened during the Taiping, invasion of their hometown. But he blamed his sister's death on the domestic politics of her husband's family. So we can see this like shifting emotions and placement of responsibilities from manuscripts to the local gazetteer. And I would like to finish our discussion with this manuscript by this page layout, where we see the really the convergence of 3 temporal points. One is this properly written text in refined calligraphy from preparations for civil examination, right? And then middle war writing in very messy manuscript form by Shen-zi, right? And then the post-war reconstruction of order that's carried by this account book, where calculations and retributions are made. So what is written here is really fascinating too. So we are all familiar with the analects, right? And these lines read in juxtaposition of what we've discussed is really striking, because it's about, what Master says about the wise man is free from confusion, the virtuous from worry, and the brave man from fears, right? And the next one is the Master says there are some people you can learn to gather wisdom, but you cannot go towards the door, towards the way wisdom, or you can go, pursue the way wisdom, but you cannot establish the way wisdom, or you may be able to establish the way wisdom, but you cannot weigh consequences and occasions, situations wisdom, and that is 𝘾, right? The hardest part. So the entire diary is about how this Confucian student Shen-zi tried to exercise in writing and rewriting, his role as a Confucian scholar, following the master's codes from the analects, and that's a great challenge. And I would say that this practice of writing was his refuge and agency at the occurrence of this war. Now, I would like to conclude today's talk by contrasting that manuscript page with the Taiping placard, because they just differ so much in terms of their material form, their audience, their content, and also their visuality. So I discussed this placard in chapter 1 of this book. And here is the image from which I had people help me make the cover of the book. So that is the talk today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a marvelous talk, so rich in details and so many insights. So I don't know about the audience. Maybe I should give priority to the audience for raising questions. But if you need more time to think, what are you going to ask? No. So maybe let's start at the end with this all these quotations from the Analects, because the other week, was it a week or two ago, I was teaching the Yu, and somehow we got to this place talking about 位可以全, on the concept of 全 in Chinese thought, and how important it is, first of all, and how in a moment of historical turmoil, it's especially important. You make very difficult choices. You have to weigh consequences. You have to weigh the odds. It's the hardest thing. That's why it said, 可以立位可以全. So, and listening to you and seeing so graphically how all these revisions were made in later periods, the revisions themselves show a process of weighing the odds and weighing the consequences of his action. But I wonder whether, more specifically, do you see in the diary any sense of this author blaming himself for moments of compromising actions that he felt he had to justify because it was what the situation demands?
Well, that is such a deep question, and I have to really run through my head. I do see occasions. So he went to divination at the temple to decide whether he should, remove the family or not, and he received an answer. But he, later on, the decisions he made following the divination did not yield a positive outcome. And because everything was so precarious at the time, any decision he made is put into contingency. However right that decision was right to him at that moment, and the next moment it may be overthrown. So I see that kind of blame, but I'm not sure if he take it as encroachment of his Confucian identity.
So he decides to flee with the family, right? At that point, ignoring the divination results, basically.
Well, it's very complicated. He decided. So the divination told him to move to one direction of the town, but later on it turned out not to be so positive. But the escape, the whole deal of escape was so out of control to some extent because, in fact, they were having the breakfast when the Taipings came to their backyard. And he planned to move, according to himself, that afternoon. But now they have to scramble and leave. But now, who can leave? Because they are so close, right? And the mother begged him to leave by himself to preserve the bloodline of the family, whereas all the female family members stayed behind. And among the female family members, there were his wife and his younger sister, who were younger and went to hide somewhere else, along with their neighbors who were on escape. But the elder sister and the mother stayed behind. And the elder sister threw herself into the pond at the backyard of the house, but she was saved by the Taiping rebels. And so she survived that suicidal attempt. And the next morning, Shenzi came back to the household and finding only his mother and his elder sister. And then for the rest of the few days, he went to look for the younger sister and the wife. So, yes.
Complicated.
It's very complicated
decision.
And yeah. and I was thinking that by like this idea of 权 being there, it also implies a sense of certainty that you can arrive at the end after 权, right?
I don't think you can, but you are telling yourself that actually this is the best you can do, that even moral action is the art of the possible. It's a kind of practical morality that resists absolutes, right? So in that sense, is particularly important for that moment, especially in this kind of accounts when so much of it is about the women staying behind and killing themselves or to preserve their honor and so on. Then how moral it is to leave them behind is the question.
Yes, and I think that maybe is why he struggles so much with the sister's death.
Wei-Lu, yeah.
Just kind of a small question. I'm just curious about if there are sources for other parties involved, namely. So this is super fascinating, I guess, because you have this like local granular level of what's going on. So I guess, given my ignorance of this period, are there sort of chain sources like from the diaries of other generals or soldiers, even whether it be written in Chinese or Manchu, or even sources were there written sources written by the rebels as well? So it'd be like the dream, instead of the collapse of heaven, I guess it'd be the dream of Deus or something. But I'm just curious about the other side.
Yes, there are numerous accounts produced from more grand kind of level of narrative, and Shenzi's account is very much localized. But it's also kind of comprehensive because it gives you a view of this war from a very minuscule perspective that cannot be rendered by the official histories, and there's a lot of writers who try to emulate the ways in which historical official histories are written, including Shenzi himself, right, who produced a text in resemblance of that. So that is a great question, and they are comparative sources from which we can get a idea of how historical development really happened in this area, and that is what I use as a background to reconstruct this narrative of the diary. Thank you.
If I may presume to act on behalf of Huan, because the book is also about competing discourses, right? So among other things, it's also the kind of stories put out by the Taiping rebels themselves as to what their movement is all about and what the Qing government is saying and so on. So everybody is telling their story in a sense. And this particular chapter has a very zoomed in local quality to it and a very fine-grained analysis of the experience of one individual. Professor Liu, you will answer this.
I'm fascinated by your talk. Thank you very much. And I also appreciate your very skillful reading of the details. It's very challenging. I can see the words are very sometimes very unclear. So my question is, do you have any critical concern behind this project? I mean, your presentation made me think of the notion of hidden transcript, which, this notion is sometimes romanticized to, over-romanticized to talk about the agency of these individuals, right, or subordinate people. But do you have any critical concern that, or do you want to suggest that the narratives produced by these individuals or small people, right? Does it mean something politically, especially when you mention about competing visions, right? And I can see you talk about minuscule perspective, personal experience. Do you suggest something? I mean, deeper integration. Yeah.
Oh, thank you
Yeah,
so
for
much.
us to think about this
Yeah.
the grand narrative of history, right?
Yes.
Because but everybody knows that is dramatic, heroic, lots of meanings are invested into this grand narrative, right? But what's your take on that? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Liu, for this wonderful question. And I think that question really underpins how I envision this project. And so I'm really trying to show the contrast of, here we see this, manuscript of all the disasters experienced by one family of Shen in, 𝘾𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤. And I have to say that Shen-zi, he, in the social strata, I don't think he belongs to the subordinate group. He is a well-educated man who has resources in the family and, was a tutor and studied really hard for, civil service examination, and later on was, brought into the capital to participate in contemporary politics, right? So he's a very active Jiangnan literatus at the time. And his life probably was way much better than those, did not have as much resources, who probably could not move the entire family when the Taipings were at their doorstep. And so I think, but even to this man's experiences, I feel like in my consultation of, the official histories have been written by, for the Taiping period, I feel that even for people like him, there's not too much light that's been shed on individuals. And so I feel that it's really very important and thought-provoking for us to take a different perspective from these materials and from these intimate accounts. And I highly doubt that Shen-zi ever meant to publish his Beishan Biqi collection, where he has records about how the female family members were left behind and their experiences during the war. And as I said, in chapter 1 and 2, I really delve into this grand narrative, this ideal put up by the Taipings or the Qing government that proclaims an utter total sense of transcendence and stability. And so, yes, your question was part of how I started this project thinking of too. Thank you very much.
So maybe it's not a question of a personal account making a difference in terms of how the events were understood at that time on a grand scale, but rather from our perspective, how grateful we are to have some personal accounts and some first-person history that add to our understanding of what's actually happening.
Yes.
Tansi, yeah.
Thank you so much. This was a fascinating presentation. Although I don't work on imperial China, but just the idea of looking at personal narratives and into just against the grand narrative of history, as everybody knows and reads about. I have two questions, and I'm sorry I'm not too aware of the subject, so I'm sorry if it just sounds too superficial.
No, please.
So my first question is the idea of, you mentioned how diary is a personal form of writing, and you mentioned the dichotomies, the binaries of performativity and sincerity. So as you're writing diary, it's a personal act. You think that it's just going to be you. I mean, it's not for public consumption or anything. So I'm just asking, do you feel that when he's just writing his personal diary, is he performing? Is he being sincere? Because you just mentioned that he's not writing that one day somebody's going to read it, but he's a scholar official. I mean, and subconsciously, does he feel that it's going to be, open for public, view or something like that? So do you see the sense of him performing for an audience, or just writing for his own good? How today, a lot of feminist writers, they say this idea of subjectivity, I'm writing for myself and I don't care what everybody thinks, or what they think when they read it or something, or they don't read. So I'm just because of your, I thought it was very interesting, this binary of performativity and sincerity that you mentioned. The second question is more general about the book. I'm sorry I haven't read I'm looking forward to reading it. But you mentioned about the central argument of the book about the recreation of past models that runs through the book. So I'm just wondering if there's time and if you could just elaborate on it. Like, are these the works that you're reading? How are they recreating past models? Are they using the past to write about the present? So what are they using some literary models today or some? I'm just curious to learn about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for these wonderful questions. So for the first question, it's a very complicated one, right? And I feel that so in writing a diary, I feel that essentially there is a need to communicate, right? Once we put words onto paper, we are expressing this need to communicate. With whom, right? Ourselves, right? Is our first audience maybe, right? And then there's also potential audience that we may not be able to see, right? Whether or not we put it into print. And so when you present yourself onto paper, I think the degree of this consciousness about performance differs, right? Sometimes when you write in a very self-censored kind of mindset, it just naturally becomes, there is an audience that you have to speak to, right? Even though you may just put it in your drawer and never want to show it to anyone, right? And at the same time, in the context of Imperial China, it is common for writers or for any literators to just lay their notes on the table. So supposedly friends who come by can flip through what's written, in their accounts or miscellaneous accounts in manuscript form. Because we sometimes see this in, miscellaneous notes that people write about their encounters of certain information at their friend's household, and also in literary novel. So I think this kind of privacy introduced into the form of accounts or daily accounts or diary is a very Western, modern concept. And so when we think of late imperial writings, we have to always bear in mind how much privacy, like how private the space of writing we are talking about. And for the case of Chen-zi, I would say that he really oscillates between these two ends, right? It's a spectrum, and he's sometimes closer to this one, sometimes closer to that one. And I think in the two volumes where he treats public events, there is certainly a sense of performativity. In fact, he adopts this role as like Shen-zi, not his name, but Master Shen, historian Shen, to comment on what he's written in the two volumes that deal with public realm more. But in the one that treats more domestic affairs, this role of Shen-zi, historian Shen, never comes up. So I don't know if that is the answer to your question. And the second question about the models and recreation of them, it's not as apparent in this diary that we are seeing here, though I have to point out that it is really, I feel very grateful for encountering this resource, because we rarely have diaries survive from the 17th century or before, right? And one of the most well-known accounts about the Ming-Qing dynastic transition is accounts of 10 days in Yangzhou, right? Which really, came to light very late, it was later part of the Qing dynasty. So I think to be able to hold, you know, a resource like this, you know, to see the fragile material form of it is very rare and precious. And I do have a lot of, you know, great gratitude towards the Shen family too, and now the 𝘾𝙤𝙤𝙦, you know, local library, because I think this is the treasure of the library, and they allow me to consult it. And so in other accounts produced in the middle of the war, we do see writers refer to the 10 days in Yangzhou accounts. So that's, you know, from the, you know, genre of diary perspective. And in other chapters, I treat literary novel and plays and stories about the fantastic, where they engage with previous tropes and you know, so-called models more intensely than what we are seeing here. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Huan, would you say that in answering Tanvi's question about the public or private nature of diaries, maybe the only thing we can do is to think about a range of examples of from the Mingqing context of how public some diaries are and how private can you get, and then that way we can put Shenzi on the spectrum. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But what you're saying is, so think of Li Siming, like 月漫堂, that's entirely public. Like even 叶绍元, 贾行玉珠, it is pretty public. Because he writes the sociality into the diary. So and so comes, and I know who it's as if, almost as if he knew who would be reading it, right? So I think what is interesting here, and it is precisely this range in this particular diary that you just described. So, as you said, in this case, it's not so much a formal innovation, but almost an accident of history, because it's so close to our time that we're able to see so much more clearly the process of the formation and revision of this work. Right? So that we can think about this private-public question with so much more resources.
And yes, and that is how I feel when I was handling materials from this period too. So we all know Dream of the Red Chamber, right? The masterpiece of Chinese literature. And Professor Ye is the expert of Dream of the Red Chamber, sitting right here. And you know, we always suspect, you know, this writer has put his poems into the novel or things like that, and I might be wrong, you know, here. But in chapter 4, I discussed this full-length, novel written by someone also experienced this war, and we are fortunate to have these poetry collections and prose collections survive, so that we can see how he does transplant some kind of previous poem works into the literary novel. So that's one way of writing a literary novel that we may not be able to see as clearly in previous times, like from the 17th or 18th century. So just an echo to what you were saying.
Maybe you should tell them more about Wai-yee, because this was the most popular novel in the 19th century, but very few people read it now. But so just say a couple of words about the novel.
Right. So the first chapter is about this full-length.
Which novel?
Wai-yee.
Traces of Flowers and the Moon. So it was extremely popular in late 19th century and early 20th century, and so it really influenced the so-called man reduction butterfly school, which was read widely in the first half of 20th century among Chinese readers. And so this writer, he also, but he was on the margins of this war, because unlike Shenzi, he was not located right in the middle of the battlefield, or where the war was happening. He was on the peripheries because he was traveling away from his home Fujian, and then because of the war, postponed his trips to the capital for civil service examination, and then wandered around for about 7 or 8 years. So he wrote the bulk of this fiction, and when he was away from home, right? And this bulk deals with romance he had with a courtesan. So all these themes are very well much developed already. The talent and beauty, scholar and beauty motif, 才子佳人, right? But he puts his personal experience of it, and we can read it as very much bearing the autobiographical impulse of this writer. And that kind of writing about the self, like writing about individual's historical existence, is what I saw in most of the artistic, literary creations about the war that I've consulted. So people had a strong desire to talk about what they witnessed and what they experienced during the war, and they are looking for valid means to make such expressions. And with narratives, they can sort of put order into those experiences. And in literary novel or in drama, we all see this casting the self as one of the protagonists onto the stage and onto the pages. And then this writer of Traces of Flowers and Moon returned home and added a few more chapters. And in those chapters, he develops a very dark but also fantastic vision of this war as a overarching kind of conclusion of this history period that he wrote about. Yeah, thank you.
Other questions?
I would take a minute just to say that there's several other pieces of literature in the book, not just the Journal of Shenzhou, but novels, fiction, drama.
Mm-hmm.
What else? Did I miss any?
A short story.
Short story, yeah, fiction, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I was just curious, how did you choose the final pieces to analyze? Did you have like a big group that you started with, and then you have to whittle them down, or did you just know, oh, I want to talk about this piece of literature in this diary? Just curious.
Thank you, Kristen, for this question. Yes, I really feel like, I don't know how it feels for the editor, but when I was thinking of a book, I was thinking of curating the chapters and to put the puzzles. Yeah, so and then during that curating process, I first started with really looking at as much as possible sources that I can find, and then for instance, even though I only zero in on this one diary, from this period, but I've seen, many of them.
Right.
Yeah, and then selected this one. And for drama as well, because there were many plays written after the war.
Yeah.
And but the one I found in chapter 5 is the longest, and also I think most motivated by this autobiographical kind of impulse of the writer. And the literary novel is a different case because it's really long. It's long. The novels tend to be long, and not many people can sit down to write it. And you may not have an audience after you finish it, as what happened to the literary novel, because it was not put into print until the author has passed away in late 19th century. These, I think the circumstance for each genre is different, and the way I deal with them also differ. But in choosing the ones I discuss, I did consult as many as possible materials I could find. Yeah, thank you.
It's a bit like, isn't it, Juan? Like reading with an idea in mind also sharpens your focus as to what belongs to this book, right? So the novel, Huan Jin, for example, is actually very well known among literary historians, but it's always discussed as an example of the sentimental novel, one of the heirs of the story of the stone, and etc., etc. But if you're not thinking about the war and the experience of the war, then you wouldn't have kind of placed it as belonging to this discussion. And but once you look at it from that angle, then it really actually contributes a lot to, first of all, to the book, but also new ways of looking at the novel, which other people haven't done before, right?
Yes, and I think to talk about taking a different perspective, I think that was also helpful in my treatment of the Taiping and Qing ideology, because they are so widespread and long existing materials, and everyone knows about them. But I think to try to look at from a literary perspective, to ask about the value of narratives in these political ideologies. Also help us to understand them in a different way. For instance, how the Taipings deliberately developed their ideology through the course of their 1.5 decade history in their propaganda, in their proselytizations. So that is something I would add to this comment.
Sorry for all those silly questions. I'm just curious, it's not really a fully baked question, but it has to do with materiality, or just kind of a broad picture how you, or maybe re-elaborating, just because I didn't fully catch everything, how you sort of came to that framework. I guess maybe you're in the archives, and maybe you could say a little more about how the content was formed. Just a little bit about the material. Something I didn't get on myself.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. So when I was in graduate school, I was very much I was taking courses in different departments. I was very much influenced by media studies, and now everyone. It's a common term that we cite, I know. But at the time, media studies, when we talk about them, it's primarily associated with film still, and also sometimes book history as well. So in taking a book history perspective, I have to look at the object of these books, because the pages and not only the visual but also like the physicality of these materials give us different clues about this text that may not necessarily be yielded by the words that's written on them. For instance, this diary I came across, I first read it in a modern typeset edition. And like many other ones, but compared with other diaries, the modern type edition has a lot of slippages, and words that's blocked out. And if you work with Chinese characters, sometimes they don't know what character it is, and they just cross it out, or a blank box. And so I felt that there's something more about it, and that's how I got to track down.
Did you know that it has been so much revised with all these little pieces of paper?
No, I did not know.
Yeah.
So I was in ecstasy when I saw the actual text in the library. Thank you.
So for Huai-yee, it would mean just standing along the Yellow River and digging up a trove of slips that totally verify your argument, right? Yeah. Hey,
Hi.
Sabina. Yeah.
I'm Sabina Knight, and I apologize for being late. But so you may have already addressed this question, but your description talks about your book offering an important comparative perspective on the global 19th century, and it's always a challenge how we talk about, the 19th century being this Western construct with a bunch that works well in a tradition that divide things up into centuries. But when we apply it to China, it's obviously very problematic to decide that that's a unit of analysis, though we do it all the time, especially when we write in English. So I wondered, you may have already addressed that, but I wondered if you could just say something about, your book offering this perspective on the global 19th century?
Well, thank you so much, Dana, for this wonderful question that I didn't have time to, talk more in this talk. So this moment, I think, is really captivating the 19th century because so many things are happening, and we tend to think that it's a Western imposed kind of change to the Eastern world, right? That's the kind of impact introduced by the Western world.
Well, actually, I was sort of wondering just
If I understood you correctly, of course.
Well, there's that. I was actually thinking of it. My question really concerns it as a category of analysis. But
Right.
you can answer it either way. It's fine.
Yes.
Go ahead and answer it that way. That wasn't my
Right.
question, but that's fine. That's interesting too.
Yes, and this book is in dialogue with that category of analysis precisely.
Okay.
So thank you for this question. So what I'm trying to argue is that there's innate changes happening within Chinese literature and culture already, and those changes are not necessarily, under the so-called Western impact, or that fall into the category that you are just talking about. And so, for instance, in the literati novel and drama and stories about the fantastic, right, they all draw upon this long Chinese literary tradition of, say, religious transcendence, like reincarnation, and also historical drama such as the Peach Blossom Fan. So this, within this tradition, this whole body of literature change is happening to it already. And so that's what I think my book can contribute to what we traditionally think what this Taiping period might mean, because it's so overshadowed by the idea of the 𝘾𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤 being inspired by Christianity. But I think there's more layers that we can tease out when we talk about this period. Thank you for this question.
Yeah, and if anyone would like to look at the book, I have this copy here, and I will leave it here, and then afterwards, if you're looking at it, please put it in the bookshelf in the hallway of the Asia Center, which features some of our books. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. Thank you.